Everyone in the courtroom thought it would be a routine conviction. A 19-year-old black kid accused of stealing a luxury car, caught near the scene, fingerprints on the wheel, case closed, right? But then he opened his mouth, and what happened next didn't just shock the judge. It exposed the system in front of a room full of people who had already decided he was guilty. Inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse, a dense silence hung like fog, thick and oppressive. The courtroom was packed, every pew in the gallery filled with murmuring spectators, reporters with notepads half raised, and curious eyes all trained on the figure standing beside the defendant's table, 19-year-old Jalen Dawson. Jalen looked like a boy pretending to be a man in clothes that didn't quite fit. His too-big blazer sagged at the shoulders, his tie slightly crooked, but his eyes, they didn't belong to a kid. They were focused, sharp, and unblinking. He stood before the imposing bench of Judge Walter Grayson, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. Grayson was known across the city for being dismissive, impatient, and, if one read between the lines of his past rulings, deeply biased, especially toward young black men. Grayson leaned back in his high-backed chair, his gaze dripping with disdain. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" he sneered, arms crossed. "This isn't debate club, kid." The courtroom chuckled, the kind of cruel laughter that feeds off power imbalances. Even the bailiff smirked. Jalen didn't blink. From the prosecutor's table, Mitchell Carrington, polished, smug, the picture of state confidence, smoothed his suit, preparing for a performance he believed required minimal effort. In his mind, this case was done. An open-and-shut charge of grand theft auto and resisting arrest, with witnesses and evidence neatly lined up. The kid had been found near the scene. His fingerprints were on the car. A chase had ensued. What more was there? Jalen's court-appointed lawyer, Lisa Thornton, began to rise. She wasn't incompetent, just exhausted. Too many cases, not enough time. But before she could speak, Jalen gently placed a hand on her forearm. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went still. Lisa froze. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor chuckled, almost kindly. But Jalen's face was resolute. Grayson rolled his eyes. "If you insist, proceed." Jalen took a breath and stepped forward, not with bravado, but with clarity. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady but firm, "I'd like to address the testimony regarding Officer Daniel Ruiz." Carrington raised an eyebrow. "The officer who saw you behind the wheel?" "Yes," Jalen nodded. "According to the police report, Officer Ruiz claimed to have identified me during the chase and stated I was driving the stolen Audi A6. Grayson raised a hand. "It's in the record, Mr. Dawson." "I understand, but I'd like to introduce evidence that Officer Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the vehicle was first reported stolen." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Carrington scowled. "I've submitted a motion for the officer's GPS logs and time card records. If reviewed, they'll show he clocked in 30 minutes after the car was already in motion, according to dispatch." Carrington immediately objected, but Jalen pressed on. "Furthermore, no dashcam footage has been provided to verify his location at the time of the alleged identification." Grayson shifted in his seat. Carrington stammered something about chain of command, but it was clear Jalen had drawn blood. Then Jalen turned to the fingerprints. "The prosecution asserts that because my fingerprints were on the steering wheel, I must have driven the car. But I'd like to offer an analogy. If I walk through a department store and touch a jacket, and someone else later steals it, am I the thief?" Grayson didn't answer. Neither did Carrington. "I leaned against that car outside a 7-Eleven. It was unlocked. I never drove it. If there were other prints, they weren't processed. And the technician who analyzed the prints? Not subpoenaed. I've had no opportunity to challenge their methods, the chain of custody, or even the identity of the prints attributed to me." Jalen wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing the cracks in the prosecution's confidence. The courtroom was listening. With Carrington visibly rattled, Jalen introduced a piece of evidence that had been buried deep in the file, the victim's own statement. Raymond Whitaker, the owner of the Audi, gave a verbal and written description of the suspect. Jalen said. He described a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a navy hoodie and jeans. Jalen paused. Your Honor, I'm 5'8". I'm not white, and I was arrested wearing a red Lakers hoodie and sweatpants. Carrington tried to interrupt, but Jalen held firm. If this case were truly airtight, why was this key detail overlooked? Why wasn't Mr. Whitaker called as a witness? He continued, I was arrested several blocks from the abandoned vehicle, holding a bag of snacks and my phone. No stolen items. No car keys. No sign I'd been driving. Jalen unfolded a printed image from a street security cam. Him walking past a corner store with timestamps inconsistent with the chase timeline. The judge took a long pause. For the first time, doubt crept into his tone. And you're saying none of this was considered before the charges were filed? No, Your Honor, Jalen said softly, because people saw what they expected to see. A young black man near a crime scene. Judge Grayson looked older in that moment. The smirk had faded. The condescension melted. He turned to Carrington, who could barely meet his eyes. Does the prosecution have anything further? The judge asked. Carrington shook his head. Then, in the interest of justice, Grayson said, voice now grave, this court finds that the case against Jalen Dawson lacks sufficient evidence and fails to meet the burden of proof. Case dismissed. The courtroom exploded. Gasps, voices, scribbling pens. The bailiff tried to quiet the gallery. Jalen stood frozen for a heartbeat before finally turning to Lisa, who smiled, astonished. Outside, reporters surged. Cameras flashed. Jalen, how did you learn all this? What's next for you? They shouted. He said nothing. At the top of the courthouse steps stood Denise Dawson, his mother, his teacher, his quiet force. She pulled him into a fierce embrace, whispering, I knew you could do it. Across the street, Judge Grayson stood watching through the tinted window of his black sedan, his expression unreadable, but something inside him had changed. Maybe not entirely, but a crack had formed in his certainty. Jalen's story wasn't just a legal win. It was a warning shot across the bow of a justice system that had grown too comfortable with shortcuts and assumptions. The headlines the next day called him a prodigy of the courtroom. But Jalen knew better. He wasn't a prodigy. He was prepared. And that was the tragedy. Not that he had succeeded, but that so few others ever got the chance. How many Jalen Dawsons were sitting in holding cells without mothers who taught them law, without the instinct to question power, without the courage to speak when everything told them to stay quiet? The justice system runs on paper, laws, rules, procedures, but it's operated by people. People with blind spots, people with biases. And unless those people are challenged, the system remains broken. Jalen didn't walk away from that courthouse thinking the fight was over. He walked away knowing his life had just begun, not as a defendant, but as a future defense attorney. And maybe one day, a judge who wouldn't need to be reminded that the truth doesn't always wear a badge or a suit. So if the story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Demand more. Because next time, it might not be Jalen. It might be your friend, your brother, your child. And they'll need more than luck. They'll need a system that listens. Hit that like button. Subscribe. And most importantly, don't stay silent. Justice starts when we refuse to look away.